Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramaddanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishno Vande Jagatgurum. Welcome everybody, good evening. So last time we went up to Shloka 40 of chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, correct? Okay. To recap very briefly, Bhagavan Krishna is trying to persuade Arjuna to fight in this just war. He's on the right side of the war. He's fighting for justice, and he doesn't want to fight. And so in verses 12 to 30, Bhagavan Krishna has been explaining why he shouldn't worry so much about killing these people. What's the main reason he gives in those verses, 12 to 30? Anybody? That comes a little later. Yeah, maybe also these verse numbers, it's very hard to. But before he starts talking about duty, what is the keynote of the teachings for 25 verses? Exactly. Atman. You are the Atman, you're not the body mind. You're not the body, you're not the mind, you are the Atman. You are the Atman, you are the Atman. The Atman is never born, the Atman never dies, right? That now in verse 39, Bhagavan Krishna says that that teaching is based on Sankhya Buddhi, the intelligence based on Sankhya. We'll find out in later chapters that Sankhya is a synonym for what Bhagavan Krishna calls Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. And what does it mean? It means use your buddhi, your intelligence, to discriminate between the body-mind complex on the one hand, which ultimately you are not, and the eternal soul, the divine soul which you are. That's the basic idea behind the Sankhya philosophy. Okay. And then Bhagavan Krishna says in verse 39, now I'm going to, and what Trisha said about doing your duty, that comes immediately after verse 30. So 31 up to 38, more or less. Then Bhagavan Krishna says to Arjuna, so you're the Atman, but that still doesn't give a direct reason to fight in the war. You're a Kshatriya by caste, and the duty of a brave Kshatriya is to fight in a just war. And therefore you should fight. So it's a combination of the Sankhya Buddhi and then your duty as a Kshatriya. Okay. And now in 39, Krishna is saying, now let me explain to you a different kind of Buddhi, a different kind of intelligence based not on Sankhya, but on yoga. And what we discussed is that almost all the commentators agree that yoga means a million things, as we all know. In the West too, it can have a million different meanings. In this context, yoga means karma yoga. Okay, that'll become clear in a little bit. So now let's begin with Shloka 41. Can you all open the app and go to chapter 2, Shloka 41. And unfortunately, the commentary that they have for these shlokas really is not. They pulled out the wrong or incomplete passages from Sri Aurobindo's commentary. So they're not as helpful as it could be, unfortunately. Okay, is everybody on Shloka 41? If anybody doesn't have the app, I'm going to say it one more time. Go to the app store on your phone and type in Gita space Aurobindo, AUROBINDO. And you should be able to find the app and download it for free. Okay. Are most people on this? Are you on the shloka? So we can begin. Okay. I'm going to recite one pada, which means 1/4 of the verse, and then you repeat after me. Okay. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi ekeha kurunandana bahushakha hyanantascha buddhayo vyavasainam. Good. Why so shy? I'm only hearing Meda's voice. Try to speak up next time. 41. Oh, that's why. So people aren't on the right verse. Okay, so get to verse 41. And can everybody read Devanagari or no? No? Teresa says no. So do you have, but the app should also have, yeah, the English. So you can follow the English. Okay. So what I tend to do for those of you who are new is we go through what's called the Anvaya below this. It should also be in the app. Do you have the Anvaya? Can you see whether she has Anvaya? The rearrangement of the words in the verse to make the meaning more easily comprehensible. But yeah, but it's a feature. You have to say yes to, otherwise it won't show up. Like in the beginning when you open the app, doesn't it ask you? Yeah. And did you select yes? I should have told you. Sorry. You did. Okay, good. But I think Trisha may have selected no. Okay. All right. Yeah, it should be in preferences. The problem is in iPhone, you click on preferences and the app shuts down. So congratulations. So yes, that's an Apple glitch. Okay. Sorry for boring the online audience. We're having some technical difficulties. Okay, so let's begin with the Anvaya of verse 41. Hey Kurunandana. Krishna is addressing Arjuna, the joy of the Kurus. Oh Arjuna. Iha, here, Vyavasaya Atmika Buddhi. Now here, see there are mistakes. The end of the sentence should be after Eka, not after Buddhi. So that vertical line, that's the end of a sentence in Sanskrit. That should go after the next word, Eka. Because otherwise it makes no sense. Because it should be Iha Vyavasaya Atmika Buddhi Eka. The fixed and resolute intelligence is Eka. It is one-pointed, homogeneous. And then the next sentence begins in the Anvaya, Avyavasainam, among Avyavasainam Buddhayaha, among those with Avyavasaina Buddhi, means irresolute intelligence, the opposite of Avyavasaya Buddhi. People whose buddhis are confused, going all over the place. I don't know what I want, this kind of thing, scatterbrained. He, indeed, Bahushakaha Anantascha. Okay, Bahushaka means many branching, multifarious. Shaka literally means the branch of a tree, so Bahushaka. And Anantaha, infinite, means there's no end to your desires and to your confusion, mental confusion. Okay, so just where it says Sri Aurobindo's interpretation, what it actually is usually it's his translation. So the translation is, the fixed and resolute intelligence is one and homogeneous. That's the word Eka in the original verse. O joy of the Kurus, Kurunandana. Many branching and multifarious is the intelligence of the irresolute. So you might wonder, well, where's Karma Yoga here? We're not quite there yet, okay? This is it's a kind of prelude to explaining, because we'll find soon that a synonym for Karma Yoga here in the next few verses is going to be Buddhi Yoga. That's significant. Another name that Krishna gives for Karma Yoga is Buddhi Yoga. In fact, before he uses the word Karma Yoga, he uses the word Buddhi Yoga. I think we'll be able to get to it today. So that's why the word Buddhi is extremely important. Intelligence. What kind of intelligence? One that has a very clear and fixed goal, full of resolution. And again, for those of you who are new, the method that I've been adopting throughout is, instead of relying on any one commentary, I read multiple commentaries beforehand, and then sort of try to pull out insights, what some of the most interesting or important insights from the different commentaries. So with regard to this verse, I really like what Swami Tapasyanandaji has to say. His book is called Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the Scripture of Mankind. Okay. I think it's 77. Yeah. Okay. So he says, this gives the contrast between one who wholeheartedly follows the spiritual path, that's the one with Vyavasayatmika Buddhi, and a worldly minded person who follows wealth, sensual satisfaction, and ambition. A person who has, he wrote this a long time ago, a person who has a spiritual worldview A firm faith in a divine intelligence based on the instruction of the scripture and the guru has got a fixed goal that does not vary. You have a proper spiritual direction. You have a guru explaining to you what is the meaning of life. How do you achieve the goal of life? Then you'll have this vyavasayatmika buddhi. He is like a man who has a correct idea of the destination and has selected the correct road to it. He is therefore at peace, knowing that he is on the right road. A worldly minded man, on the other hand, so now talking about the opposite, so the avyavasaya buddhi person. A worldly minded person, on the other hand, may not often have a fixed worldview. He cares only for gains, enjoyments, and pursuit of ambitions. So without any conviction about the nature of the universe and his own destiny in it, he pursues these diverse satisfactions, the objects of which change from time to time. Hence, the understanding of such a person gets many branched, bahushaka, being engaged in the pursuit of several ends because of this mental confusion. One day I want one thing, and the next day I want something else. His mental energies are thus dissipated, and he loses control of the mind and becomes a slave of the senses and their objects. Okay, so this is Swami Tapasanji's interpretation of the verse, which I think is useful. Any questions before we move on? Okay. One thing I was thinking about in regard to this verse, some of you are probably aware of this psychological concept of flow. Yes? Some of you? What is flow? Can anyone explain briefly?
Losing oneself while
Yeah.
in the task. You're so engrossed that you lose sense of time and you feel one with what you're doing.
Yeah, that's right. So I was just thinking, I mean, maybe we could interpret this verse in modern terms as encouraging you to enter a state of spiritual flow when you're engaged in spiritual practice, where your mind is completely focused on the matter at hand, and you don't feel like it's a chore, and you're not thinking about doing other things. You know, oh, it would be so much nicer if I were at a concert now or something. Okay, now, the next three verses have to be read together. Part of the reason is because just grammatically, it's a kind of a long sentence, but also because conceptually, it suddenly shifts gears a little bit. The Gita, very interestingly, remember again, the Gita is a Vedāntic scripture, and Vedanta means literally the end of the Vedas, but end in a metaphorical sense, meaning the culmination of the Vedas, the highest teachings found in the Vedas, which are the Upanishads. The Upanishads are part of the Vedas, and these are considered to be the highest spiritual teachings contained in the Vedas themselves. And the Bhagavad Gita is a kind of distillation of the Upanishads. That's why it's also considered to be a Vedantic scripture, even though it's not part of the Vedas. That's why it's not Shruti. It's what's it called? The opposite, well, not opposite is Shruti, but one step down from Shruti. Shruti means part of the Vedic scripture. Anyone? What text is the Gita part of? Come on. You are so voluble last week, huh? Well, he knows, but he's just giving you guys a chance. Okay. Yes. So Mahabharata. And Mahabharata is considered Smriti rather than Shruti, right? Because it's an epic, highly regarded. Not that it's anything to sneeze at, but it's just not part of the Vedic scripture. Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata. It's considered Smriti. Shruti means directly hearing something. Smriti means remembered, literally. What it means is just one step away from the highest Vedic revelation. And because the Gita is held in such high regard, it's put on an equal footing with the Upanishads, basically. Okay, why am I saying all this? Because in the Upanishads, especially Mundaka Upanishad, if any of you have studied the Mundaka Upanishad at all, you'll find these mantras where suddenly the Rishi, who's otherwise talking about very high spiritual experience, suddenly goes on this tirade against Vedic ritualism. But I'm reading from Swami Tapasanandaji's explanation of verses 42 to 44. I can't go through everything again, unfortunately. But please review those verses, and this is his commentary. He's explaining that what Bhagavan Krishna is criticizing is the Purvamimamsa system of thought, which treats Vedic rituals to be the be-all and end-all. Then Swami Tapasanji says, these ritualistic philosophers held that the purpose of the Veda is to induce man to perform rituals and fire sacrifices, which will gain him heavenly felicity. After death, the jiva will go to those heavenly regions. Jiva means soul, individual soul, will go to those heavenly regions where they will have the enjoyments of the fruits of the sacrifices they have performed. After the fruit-bearing effects of karma are exhausted, the jiva comes back to the earth to do more karma, enabling him to enjoy heavenly felicities again. So it's a cycle going back and forth. Thus, according to them, there is no salvation for the soul or getting out of samsara. They're permanently stuck in the samsara. You either are in this earth doing these sacrifices, by means of these sacrifices, after you leave this physical body, as a soul, you go up to a temporary heaven, you enjoy up there, and then you have to come back again. And just back and forth, back and forth. The soul goes from embodiment to embodiment on earth and other spheres, enjoying the fruits of his actions. Their outlook, therefore, multiplies man's desires and ambitions. And they justify this by quoting the Vedas as authority. This is what the Upanishads and Krishna are criticizing. Not the Vedas as such, but sort of giving a wrong interpretation of the Vedas and making the rituals into a be-all, end-all, while losing sight of the higher spiritual purpose of life. In the nature of this, I'm just finishing Tapasanji's commentary. In the nature of things, their mind becomes many-branched. That's Bahushaka from the previous shloka. These are the people with avyavasaya buddhi, avyavasayatmika buddhi, or divided by all kinds of passing desires. I want this, and then once you get that, I want this, and then so you flutter around from desire to desire. They have no conviction about the ultimate destiny of humanity beyond what has been stated. They are just like wanderers and vagabonds in the expansive field of life. Okay, so I think this is a nice. Okay, well, it continues, and I think it's significant. So, in contrast to them, these people who follow Vedic ritualism are the Sankhyas and the Yogins. Sankhyas being the followers of the path of knowledge, the Jnana Yogis, and the Yogins meaning Karma Yogins, and we're about to find out what they're about. Tapasanji says, they have a spiritual worldview and a conviction regarding the ultimate destiny of humanity. They are free from desires. Their mind, therefore, gets unified following a single goal. Remember the word eka in the previous verse. The person of resolute intelligence, it's homogeneous because you have a very focused understanding of the purpose of life. Unlike that of the ritualists, whose mind becomes many-branched because of their changing desires and objectives. That single goal of the Sankhyas and the Yogins is the realization of one's spiritual nature as the Atman and one's integral relation with the Supreme Being. I'm not the body-mind complex, I'm an eternal soul. What's the connection between the soul and God? The soul itself is a part of God. There are different ways of putting it. Amsha is one way. Every soul is a part of God. You can say that every soul is a child of God, inseparably united with God. Then he says, the realization of the truth puts an end to the transmigration of the jiva, and he becomes united with the divine. Okay. Okay. And one more thing I just wanted to bring your attention to. Let's now focus on verse 44. Bhoga Ishvarya Prasaktanam Taya Paratachetasam. Oh, I was in the middle of the Anvaya, or did I finish? I didn't finish the Anvaya. Okay, so I stopped at Avipaschitaha Bhoga Aishwarya Gatim Prati Kriya Vishesha Bhavana. Oh yeah, okay. Janma Karma Phalapradam, then Yam Imam Pushpitam Vacham. These flowery words, Pushpitam Vacham, are flowery words. Pravadanti. These people, these Vedic ritualists, these Vedic fundamentalists who are always speaking fancy words, quoting from the Vedas, but sort of out of context and to justify their desire for bhoga, for enjoyments. Taya aparita chetasam, and by those words, their minds get completely diverted away from the spiritual goal. Aparita chetasam. Bhoga aishvarya prasaktanam. These people are completely engrossed in the desire for enjoyments, worldly enjoyments, and glory, bhoga and aishwarya. For these people, vyavasaya atmika buddhihi, a resolute intelligence, a one-pointed intelligence, navidhyate, is not possible. Samadho, and this word is a little bit It literally means in samadhi. But the question is, what does samadhi mean in this context? And so different interpreters have different suggestions. Shankara and Ramanuja, even though they're often at loggerheads as philosophers of very different schools of Vedanta, here they agree, interestingly. So when they agree, it's arguably a good sign that it's a plausible interpretation. Both of them say that samadhi in this shloka means mind. In the mind. So samadhau means in. So in the minds of these people with completely unfocused and distracted minds, intelligences, they can never have this resolution, this fixed mindset, one-pointedness. But Swami Vivekananda and one Western scholar I'm aware of who was at Oxford named R.C. Zahner, Z-A-E-H-N-E-R. They interpret samadhi in, I think, the more familiar sense, which is a very high spiritual experience, a kind of spiritual state of trance. Many of you know this meaning, right, of samadhi? No? Some of you. Samadhi. So what Vivekananda gives this whole second line a kind of a different spin, and he says that among those people who are obsessed with Vedic rituals, their minds are so scattered that they can never prepare the minds to attain the goal of samadhi. The goal of samadhi is far beyond their reach. They'll never be able to attain this highest spiritual state of samadhi. Okay? All right, any questions before we move on? Okay. So keep in mind that the thing that Krishna is attacking the most is that they're full of desires for worldly enjoyments. He's going to contrast these people who have these worldly desires and aims with the true karma yogis, people who follow buddhi yoga, what's about to be called buddhi yoga. But let's first look at verse 45. Traigunya vishaya veda nistraigunyo bhavarjuna nidvandvo nirdvandvo. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Nityasattvasto niryogakshema atmavan. Okay, Anvaya again. Oh Arjuna, Vedaha, the Vedas, Traigunya Vishayaha. The subject of all these Vedas is the three gunas. What does three gunas mean? We'll get to that in a second. Nistraigunyaha. Again, this again it's been interpreted in different ways, but it literally means devoid of the three gunas. Okay? Nidvandvo, completely devoid of or beyond dualities. Dvandva means the dualities of liking and disliking, desire, aversion, heat, cold. Nitya sattvastaha, being eternally in the state of sattva. And again, there are some tricky issues in this verse, which we'll discuss briefly. Okay, niryogakshemaha means without any desire to acquire things or to keep the things that you already have. Some people, they're very wealthy people who own a lot of things, but the moment they own them, that becomes a source of anxiety, because then they're worried that the relatives might thieves might try to steal their expensive cars from them, their nice watches. So that's kshema. And yoga means I don't have this, but this guy has it. I want it now. It's out of greed. So completely free from this desire for acquisition and desire to preserve what you have. Atmavan bhava. Bhava, it's an imperative. It means Krishna is telling Arjuna, do this. Be an Atmavan, a person who is fully in control and possessed of oneself, who is free from all these things, free from the three gunas, free from the dualities, who is eternally grounded in a state of sattva, and who is free from desire to acquire and to preserve. Okay? Now, as I said, there's some interpretive difficulties here. One of them is there's an apparent contradiction in this shloka. Can anyone think of what this apparent contradiction might be? You're smiling, so maybe you know. Very good, exactly. What's the contradiction seems to be Krishna is saying you should be nice. Nistraigunyaha. Nistraigunyaha means beyond the three gunas. In the second line, Krishna is saying, but be nitya sattvastaha. What are the three gunas? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva is, of course, a more spiritual guna. It makes for calmness, tranquility. Rajas is the ground of all desires, worldly desires, hankering, ambitions. And tamas is the source of laziness, inertia, procrastination, for those of you who are students, which is everyone, but not everyone is a procrastinator. Okay. Okay, so now, yes, as you pointed out, Krishna seems to be giving conflicting advice, contradictory advice to Arjuna. On the one hand, be free from the three gunas, including sattva. On the other hand, be eternally grounded in sattva. So this is a little bit tricky. So Shankara says, he takes nitya sattvastaha literally, and he says, Krishna is definitely saying to Arjuna, you should be grounded in sattva. But we have to interpret nistraigunyaha a little bit creatively. It doesn't mean be completely free from the three gunas. Shankara says, the original word that he uses is nishkama, be free from worldly desires. Which is compatible with being grounded in sattva, because remember, desire comes from rajas. And if you're sattvic, you'll find you have much less hankering for things. You know, a very rajic person is never happy because that person is always, he wants this, he wants that, she wants this, you know. Okay, so that's a clever way of resolving this apparent contradiction between nistraigunyaha on the one hand and nitya sattvastha on the other. Another thing, Ramanuja, another great commentator on the Gita, philosopher of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, he says he's feeling very uncomfortable about the fact that in the previous verses that Krishna is coming down very hard on the Vedas, because the Vedas are a holy text, right? Even the Upanishads are in the Vedas. So he tries to explain why, give more of a positive spin to what Krishna is saying about Vedic ritualism. And it's very nice. He says, Ramanuja says, the Vedas themselves, out of infinite love for struggling spiritual aspirants, enjoins rituals to those who are full of the three gunas. So he's imagining that there are different levels of spiritual aspirant. Some people are already kind of more sattvic than others. And for them, they can go straight to the Upanishads. But what about those who are full of worldly desires, full of rajas, or they just want to sleep all day and play Nintendo? These are more tamasic people. What about for them? Ramanuja says, out of love, the Vedas also cater to them by saying, let me bring you out of your tamas and the grossest rajas by getting you to do these rituals so that you can slowly get refine yourself, refine your minds, become more cultured, and ultimately with the aim of bringing you up to the point of being able to practice the higher Vedāntic teachings. This is the way that Ramanuja explains it. And this one way to think about this is the Bible. The Bible has two main books. What are they called? According to Christians, what are they called? The Old Testament and the New Testament. Of course, the Jews will not appreciate the term Old Testament, so they call it the Hebrew Bible, right? The Old Testament. But the Christians call it the Old Testament. Why? Because now Christ in the New Testament, he says, what was taught in the Old Testament is all good. 10 Commandments. Jesus is saying, these Old Testament commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, right? And so on and so forth. Jesus says these are all good, but these are not the highest spiritual teachings. These are kind of ground level. These are just to get off the ground with spirituality. These are the things that you should observe to distinguish yourself from brutes, from animals roaming around in the forest. But let me now ratchet these teachings up another level. You've been told you should not commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you have already committed adultery. Which means, so, and again, he's kind of like, taking each of the Old Testament teachings to a higher power. I mean that in the sense of exponents. I'm using math here. Which means the New Testament and Jesus, they're not rejecting the Old Testament, but they're saying that it's good as a kind of stepping stone, but you have to go beyond that. And I think we can think about the Bhagavan Krishna's criticisms of Vedic ritualism in the same way. It's all good, so long as you treat it as a stepping stone to higher spiritual disciplines and to higher spiritual aims. But if you take it as an end in itself, this Vedic ritualism, then you get stuck in a rut, and that's a real problem. Okay, does that make sense? So that's why Ramanuja is saying, actually, it's out of love that the Vedas teach these rituals for lower people who are full of worldly desires, basically, because they also need a path, right? You can't tell everybody to start. If you don't have a bachelor's degree, you can't do a PhD, right? Okay. Okay, so now let's look at the verse 46. Yavanatha udapane sarvataha samplutodake tavan sarveshu vedeshu brahmanasya vijanataha. Anvaya. Sarvataha samplutodake. When there are floods all around, when you see nothing but water, like there were a few weeks ago in some places, I think in California, right? Wasn't there a lot of flooding? Yeah. Not here, right? Yeah. Udapane yavan attaha. At a time when there's water all around, there's nothing but water, is there much use in a small well of water? It's a rhetorical question. It would mean no, right? The answer would be no. Vijanataha brahmanasya, the Brahmin, and here it's very likely not a Brahmin by caste, but somebody who is a knower of Brahman. Vijanataha, in the know, somebody who has knowledge, spiritual knowledge. Sarveshu vedeshu tavan. Just like that, all the Vedas become like that well in the midst of a massive flood, to an illumined soul, to an illumined knower of Brahman. What use are the Vedas, all the Vedas, to an illumined soul? That's one way of interpreting. You see, it's impossible to translate this without giving a kind of interpretation. So that's one interpretation that some people have given, some commentators. Sri Aurobindo, for instance, says that Vijanataha, Brahmanasya Vijanata, is a realized soul, an illumined soul. And so for them, what's the purpose in these scriptures? The aim of the scriptures is to give you illumination, right? By practicing what the scriptures teach. But if you already have illumination, what's the purpose of the scriptures? So that's one interpretation. Ramanuja has a different interpretation. He interprets Brahmanasya Vijanataha. This Vijanata literally means knowing, but he says it's a mumukshu. What is a mumukshu? Anybody know? Sanskrit term? Mumukshu. It's related to the term moksha.
Is the person
How?
who's desiring?
Exactly, desirous of liberation. Somebody who wants moksha. A sincere spiritual aspirant. So Ramanuja says, no, we shouldn't take this Brahmanasya Vijanataha to mean an illumined soul. We should take it to be a genuine spiritual aspirant, a mumukshu who is desirous of liberation. For them, and he gives it this whole verse a very different spin. He says, if there's a flood all around and somebody wants to drink, he's just thirsty. He doesn't need all the water. He's only going to go to the well and just drink a little bit of the water, even if there's all sorts of other water around. This is a little bit complicated. It's the only commentator I've seen who gives this kind of interpretation. So he says, likewise, the genuine spiritual aspirant, the mumukshu, he's able to distinguish what he wants from what he does not want, from what's useless to him. And for Ramanuja, that means separating the karma kanda from the jnana kanda. Karma kanda is the part of the Vedas which enjoins rituals. All the rituals taught in the Vedas, which the Gita is criticizing. And the jnana kanda is the Upanishads, the knowledge portion of the Vedas. So the genuine spiritual aspirant is able to separate the Karma Kanda of the Vedas from the Jnana Kanda and take only the Jnana Kanda, because that's what is going to help him or her achieve spiritual liberation. So that's a very different interpretation. There are different ways, and I don't want to say one is better than the other, but you can think about it yourselves. But I wanted to flag that there are these two different interpretations. Okay, now let's end with this very famous shloka, which many of you probably memorized in middle school. Do you guys still have Sanskrit in India? You have compulsory Sanskrit? Are you asked to memorize Gita shlokas? No. My father told me that when he was studying Sanskrit a long time ago, that he would have to memorize Gita shlokas. So I assume that this is one of them. But many of you are probably familiar with this. So let's read this. Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phalaheturbhur ma te sangostva karmani. Good. Anvaya. Karmani eva, to action, to works, alone, indeed. Te adhikaraha, do you have a right? Ma kadachana phaleshu, but not to the fruits of these actions. Right? Most of you know this verse, I assume, right? Okay. Karma phala hetuhu ma bhuhu. Don't let the motive of your actions be karma phala, the fruits of your actions. Mate, so ma means don't, or don't let. Mate akarmani sangaha astu. And don't become attached to inaction, akarmani. Don't be lazy. Don't say, I won't do this, I won't do that. Oh, okay, so if I shouldn't hanker after fruits, then it's better to just sit in my room and do nothing, or just sleep all day. No, don't do that either. Now, here's where commentators make some interesting moves. So Shankara, for instance, I think we talked about this in the past, but I'm going to mention this again. Shankara was a great exponent of Advaita Vedanta, according to which there's only one spiritual practice that directly takes us to liberation. That's the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, right? But he says Karma Yoga is not useless, but it's for inferior spiritual aspirants who have not yet attained sufficient purity of mind. For them, they should engage in Karma Yoga. They're not adhikaris for Jnana Yoga yet. Adhikari, that term is very important because he really milks this term adhikaraha in this verse. Karmani eva adhikaraste. You are an adhikara, you have an adhikara only for karma. He's saying no wonder, because because Arjuna doesn't have a sufficiently pure mind. That's why because he's an inferior spiritual aspirant, Bhagavan Krishna is telling him, you're not fit to practice Jnana Yoga. That's why I'm going to teach you this Karma Yoga practice, through the practice of which you'll be able to purify your mind and eventually come up to the level of Jnana Yoga, and then you can attain moksha. So Shankara makes heavy weather of this adhikara and saying that, see, this verse is bringing in adhikari bheda, difference in levels of spiritual aspirant, different grades of spiritual aspirant. And because Arjuna is an inferior spiritual aspirant, Krishna is teaching Karma Yoga. And it's an open question, whether you think this is plausible. And you can't decide it based on a single shloka. You'd have to really study all 700 shlokas of the Gita and look at the context of the different shlokas, look at how Bhagavan Krishna teaches Karma Yoga in other contexts. Does he really think that it's subsidiary, that it's only a preparatory discipline to the higher practice of Jnana Yoga? These are open questions. I don't want to resolve or answer these questions now. But you might ask, don't you have to have some kind of desire for results in order to engage in any action as a sane human being? Isn't it only crazy people who do things without having an aim? Aimlessly doing this and that, but without any rhyme or reason behind it. This might be a question that comes up. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking maybe we can give some concrete examples. So one, imagine you're a surgeon. Nobody here is studying medicine, right? But anyway, you might have friends that, okay. So I'm a surgeon and I have to do a life-saving surgery. This is do or die. And it's an emergency. Either I do it and I do it successfully, or the patient dies. So do I tell myself I don't care whether the patient dies? No, that's not what Krishna is saying. I'm not saying don't care whether the patient dies. You should try to do your utmost. Try to do what is your duty to the best of your ability, right? But leave the results, meaning in this case, success or failure. That's not in your hands. Whether you succeed in the surgery is not in your hands. You can do your best. So one of the expressions that monks in our order use often is, do your best, leave the rest. Is that common in India? Is that one of these? Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, so it's not just monks. Do your best, but that's a very nice expression, actually. Do your best, leave the rest. To whom or to what? Obviously, to God, exactly. This seems to be the essence of this verse. Giving you an example that is closer to home for students. Imagine you're studying for an exam. When is the first kind of midterm season? In a few weeks? Yeah, coming up. Okay. So is Krishna saying that when you study for an exam, try to fail or be completely indifferent to, oh, I don't care whether I do well or not? No, it's not quite that. The idea is do your best to study, but why? In order to learn. What is your motivation? And you'll find that people who are obsessed with grades and being in India, they call them toppers. Here, I think Americans just find that word funny. Topper. So they want to be the best in the class, These people, they tend to make themselves crazy, make themselves full of anxiety, and usually they'll do worse on the exam. So it's better to focus on just let me try to learn the material as best I can and leave the results of my studies to God. So I think these are two concrete examples, but do you have questions about this? I think this is a good note to end on. Because now, so starting with this verse, Bhagavan Krishna starts to explain Buddhi Yoga, otherwise known as Karma Yoga. And it's very, very practical. And as I said, an open question is Shankara's interpretation of the verse plausible? Is it plausible to say that according to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga is a lower practice compared to Jnana Yoga, and that Jnana Yoga alone is a direct path, and Karma Yoga is good as an indirect path by purifying the mind, but eventually you have to stop doing Karma Yoga and practice Jnana Yoga and then attain liberation. Open question. Anyway, do you guys have any questions before we do a very brief meditation? No? Okay. So sit in a comfortable posture if you're not already in a comfortable asana. It'll just be about 5 minutes. Gently close your eyes. Visualize a divine light in your heart. That light is your soul, your eternal divine soul. I'm not the body. I'm not the mind. I am an eternal soul. The body and mind are my instruments. So I'm going to repeat Om, and you chant with me. Om slowly. And try to meditate on this divine light in your heart. Om. I think I'm too high an octave. I'll go down an octave. Om. 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 Gently open your eyes. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.